The dragon is back! What's going on, guys? Hyper here, and in this video we'll talk about the recent blue post which added a bunch of frost changes to the game, and some of these are not pushed to the beta servers yet, so I will hold off on recording an actual preview video until everything is in the game. But in this video we'll just have a little discussion about what I think about these changes and potentially how this could be improved even further. Let's talk about the base spells that were changed. Empowered Rune Weapon is becoming what Hungering Rune Weapon was in Legion. The name is staying the same, but the mechanic of it is essentially changing to just be HRW. And this was a change that I actually outlined in my previous video where I talked about all of the frost changes. This was a while back, but I basically made a video about everything that I'd like to see changed about frost decay, and this was one of the major points. Empowered Rune Weapon refunded all of your runes at the same time, and especially now that it's on the GCD, getting 6 runes back at the same time just felt like a waste because you didn't have enough time to spend them quickly enough for it to be efficient. So getting a haste boost and then also getting your runes back gradually over time is a much nicer mechanic and way smoother gameplay than how Empowered Rune Weapon used to work in the past. So this is a change that I'm actually really glad about. And also this will synergize very well with Breath of Sindragosa because it is on a 2-minute cooldown, and we're now able to have it baseline along with Breath if we choose to talent into that. So we get the synergy back which we used to have in Nighthold. Pillar of Frost, as we know it, was removed from the game. And this is kind of a questionable change in my mind because we lack a damage boost cooldown now, right? We have a haste and a rune regen, so essentially a resource regen cooldown, but we don't really have anything to give our AoE or our single target a little bit of a boost. And for single target, this isn't that big of an issue because Frost was always a pretty steady damage spec. We didn't burst insanely high and we never dipped really low. Our damage was kind of even and constant. But for AoE, Pillar of Frost was a great cooldown, and losing a 1-minute CD feels pretty bad. Runic Empowerment was also nerfed from a 1.8% chance to a 1.5% chance, and this is in an attempt to reduce Frost Decay's resource generation, because if you play Frost Decay, especially in a Taurus, you might have noticed that you often run into a situation where you're capped on runes and capped on runic power, and just you're global locked and can't spend all of those resources. And in an attempt to reduce this, obviously they nerf Runic Empowerment, which will affect our early expansion gameplay a little bit, but if gear scaling remains similar to Legion, it probably won't really have a big effect on our gameplay in the second half of the expansion. Next, let's talk about the talent tree, because this is where we see a bunch of changes. In the level 56 row, Inox Assault was moved here and reworked to sometimes buff or obliterate. And the damage bonus will not be affected by Killing Machine, so you don't have to play around both of those buffs. And this seems just like the passive talent, where as long as you don't cap at 5 stacks, you will be maximizing the damage you can output with the talent. Overall, it's a passive, boring alternative to the other talents in this row, but I think it's a solid change, especially if you have downtime between packs. This will give you a very nice damage boost, because the way they described it, this will just stack up even out of combat, and when you run into a fight, you will run in with 5 stacks every time. So maybe in Mythic Plus, this will be a quite nice talent. The second talent I wanted to talk about in this row is Shattering Strikes. And this talent is completely unchanged so far, and to me this is an issue, because even though this was the go-to talent at the end of Legion in Antorus, it was mostly because we had so many secondary stats that we were global locked even without taking RA. And our set bonus also procced Razor Ice on the target, making this even more effective. Obviously in BFA we're losing our set bonus, so we're losing that synergy between the set bonus and the talent. And our haste will also be much lower, so we're not going to be building Razor Eye stacks as quickly as we were at the end of Legion. And it's kind of concerning because this talent pretty much only saw use once that set bonus was added at the end of Legion. So if we take into consideration our current stats in BFA and how the gameplay seems to be turning out, Shattering Strikes is most likely not going to see too much use, which means that we have to go back to using Icy Talons. And to me, Icy Talents is an okay talent, is just a little annoying to keep up. But the Shattering Strikes gameplay and playstyle to me was much more engaging than the other talents in this row. So I really wish that they kind of tweak this talent to make it more effective and actually usable even early in the expansion. In the level 57 row, we see Runic Attenuation being moved here and actually changed to generate runic power based on procs per minute, rather than with each melee attack. And this is in an attempt to keep it even throughout the expansion, because obviously in Legion, the more gear you had, the faster you were attacking, so the more benefit you were getting from this talent. And if they change it to a PPM, that's an easy fix to kind of keep it even throughout the expansion. As long as the PPM is reasonable, I don't really see an issue with this change, and in my mind, this is kind of a neutral change. In the level 58 row, we see Abomination's Might being replaced by Asphyxiate. And this is a great change. I complained about the Bomb's Might in the past, and Asphyx is exactly what Frost DK needed. Instead of an RNG stun that you can't play around, can't control, we need a reliable stun that is very useful in PvP because your team can play around it. If you know when you're going to stun a target, then your team can play around it and you can play around that. If it's happening on an RNG timer, as well as in Mythic Plus, for example, you can't really change your gameplay around what is happening and you can't plan accordingly. So this is a very nice change and I'm glad to see Asphyxiate on Frost DK. In the level 60 row, Avalanche was changed to trigger when casting a Howling Blast with a Rhyme proc. Obviously this change happened because of the removal of Pillar of Frost, so the choice in this row will be between either Avalanche or GS for single target, with Avalanche being the more passive option where you don't really need to alter your playstyle around it, and GS being a talent that you kind of have to play around and plan accordingly to min-max it. Even though towards the end of Legion we had so many stats that we didn't really have to play around it too much because we always had the runes to cap it. Early on in the expansion, it kind of alters your playstyle a little bit, because if your Remorseless Winter is coming off cooldown, you obviously want to save up a few runes so you can get as many stacks going as possible in the first few globals. In the level 75 row, Death Pact is back, and this is a decent talent for leveling and for PvP. But for raiding and for Mythic Plus, it's somewhat lackluster. Frost DK, much like Arms Warrior, struggles with mitigating big hits in PvE. So a talent that would boost our IBF percentage, for example, or bring back Mirror Ball, would have felt a lot better in this row. And then we get to the level 90 row, where we get Frostworm's Fury, aka Syndragosa's Fury. And this is our artifact ability, in case you didn't know. And the cooldown on it was changed from 5 minutes to 3 minutes, which is actually closer to what we had in Legion with the extra artifact trait that was introduced, I believe, around Tomb of Sargeras. And this will most likely be the single target go-to talent. However, for dungeons where you are kind of doing sustained AoE, Frostite will most likely still be better. And then obviously we have Freezing Fog here, which currently on beta also increases your Howling Blast damage by 100% if you get a Rhyme proc, but like mentioned in the blue post, they're most likely removing this. I don't know about that decision because this makes Freezing Fog actually a competitive talent against Frostite, but we'll see what happens with this in the future. And obviously in this talent row, Freezing Fog will be that passive talent that you kind of take for just passive damage that you might have to cleave with on maybe 2 targets, and then you take Frostworm's Fury on if you need burst AoE, or Frostlight if you need sustained AoE. So interesting choices overall, and I quite like the design of this talent row. For the level 100 row, we have Ice Cap, which now affects our Empowered Rune Weapon instead of our Pillar of Frost, which is obviously removed, and was buffed from a 1-second CDR to a 3-second CDR. They did say that tuning changes will still be happening and they're playing around with what this number actually should be. However, if this talent stays as it is, a 3-second CDR on our Empowered Rune Weapon is pretty big. And for single target, this does seem like the go-to choice currently, because Obliteration, which was renamed to Pillar of Frost, works the same way as it did in Legion, and without having that extra strength and frost damage boost to go with it and sync it up, it will feel much weaker to use, especially on single target. And then we have Breath of Sindragosa, which is essentially unchanged from Legion, but we now have the synergy with Hungering Rune Weapon back. So like I mentioned before, we might see a build again with either Horn of Winter or RA, depending on how well the PPM on it is tuned, to make a return and actually see Breath of Sindragosa for single target. Now, I don't know how they intend BOS to work, if they want it to be kind of an AoE talent or a cleave talent, or if they want it to be used in just all situations like it did in Nighthold. But Nighthold was kind of an exception where we had so many things synergizing together that it just became insane. So I'm curious to see how this talent will play out throughout the expansion. My overall opinion of these changes is pretty positive. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there are a few talents and spells that kind of need a little bit of tweaking or changing to fit Frost Decay a little bit better. And here I'm mostly talking about like Shattering Strikes, which could potentially be changed to be triggered by Frostbite, which would make it a really good AoE talent, for example. And then talents like Glacial Advance don't really seem to fit anymore into the spec, because obviously with Frostbite we already have an AoE button, so that just seems like a dead talent to me unless they overtune it to a point where you will be forced to taking it and it will just feel like a Frostbite with an actual cooldown on it. And then in the defensive row, obviously Deathpact, like I mentioned before, doesn't really seem to fit and won't really see too much use in my opinion, mostly because we don't really have issue healing back damage, we mostly have issue surviving the damage that we take in the first place, so Mirror Ball would be great in this talent row. The last two rows overall are pretty good, but Pillar of Frost, aka Obliteration, again, with the changes, and most notably actual Pillar of Frost being removed, it will feel very underpowered to use because you're not pairing it or synergizing with a strength booster or frost damage booster. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them in the section below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and sub to the channel. It means a lot and really shows support. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.